A chief HR officer said, I have the title, I just don't feel like I have the room yet. Listen, there is a lot inside of that sentence because by the end of this episode, I want you to know exactly what she meant. And I want you to be able to tell whether your own leadership team is really changing or if everybody is just talking about change. You can give someone a leadership title without ever giving them permission to lead. And those two things are very different. Here's the question I think every executive team needs to ask. Not, did we have the leadership offsite? Did everybody take the survey? Or did we roll out the new initiative? The real question is, did anything actually change in how people showed up? Did behavior change? Because activity and transformation are not the same thing. Leadership development is not measured by what you completed. It is measured by what your people do differently after. Today, I'm going to walk you through 5 different industries and show you the difference between a team that is changing and a team that is stuck. Real change versus performative change. And by the end, you should be able to recognize exactly which one is happening inside your organization. If you're listening to Lena Speaks, chances are you already know leadership is not just about having a title. It's about what happens when the room gets hard, trust is low, when communication breaks down, and when the right people are in the wrong seats, or where everybody knows something needs to change, but no one knows how to move it forward. That's the work that I do. I'm Lena Morris, founder and CEO of Authentic Encounters. I work with executives, leadership teams, and organizations to uncover leadership culture and people issues that are quietly costing them their performance, trust, and results. At Authentic Encounters, we don't just train leaders, we help change how leadership actually happens. So if you're listening and thinking, Lena, you just described my organization, then maybe it's time for us to talk. Book a complimentary leadership clarity call with me. The link is in my description and in the bio. Let's chat to find the real issues and determine what change needs to happen. Authentic Encounters, from training to transformation. Now let's get back to the conversation. So let's get back to the chief HR officer. She had the title on paper. She absolutely belonged in that room. The org chart, her experience, and her position said she belonged there. But every time she disagreed with the CEO, she apologized first. Every single time. So we spent almost our entire first session working through one thing. What are you going to stop apologizing for? Because that wasn't really a competence issue. It looked like competence, but underneath it, it was an authority issue. Do I believe I have the right to say what I see? Do I believe I have the right to disagree? Do I believe I have the right to take up space in this room? If someone has to apologize before they tell you the truth, you don't have a competence problem. You have an authority problem. And here's where the difference shows up. Teams that actually are changing name the behavior, they say it out loud, and they practice it. Teams that are stalling keep talking about building confidence in a very broad, safe language for months and sometimes even years. So here's the test to ask that leader. What have you stopped apologizing for? If they can answer that clearly in one sentence, something is changing. If they have to talk around it for 5 minutes before they get there, there's probably still more talking than changing. Now let's talk about electric cooperatives and utilities. One of the hardest coaching conversations I've had this quarter wasn't with the CEO, shockingly. It was with the foreman. And what hit me was this. He did not believe he was allowed to call himself a leader. Now, everybody around him could see the leadership. He was already doing the work. People were already looking to him, but in his mind, leadership belonged to somebody with another title. And the GM had never told him otherwise, and that matters. Because here's what stalling looks like. Leadership sits in a strategic planning meeting and talks about building the leadership pipeline. Sounds good, looks good on that good PowerPoint slide. Here's what changing looks like. A GM sits across from somebody and says, I want you to know you are already leading. They say it out loud, directly, and specifically. Succession planning does not start when somebody gets promoted. It starts the moment a leader names the potential they see. Because there is a huge difference between a sentence inside a strategic plan and a sentence somebody hears from the person whose opinion really matters. That is how people begin to see what you already see in them. And quite frankly, that gap is one of the reasons organizations lose good future leaders and then spend a whole lot of money trying to replace them from the outside. So here's the test. Look at your last 3 promotions. Before those people got the title, did somebody actually name the leadership they were already demonstrating? Did somebody tell them, I see you, I see what you're doing, you are ready? Or did the new title just show up in an email or on a memo? Because those are 2 very different cultures. Second comparison, healthcare and behavioral health. There's a sentence I hear all the time. We've rolled out more self-care resources. And listen, resources are not bad, but resources by themselves are not culture change. That's where organizations can fool themselves because it feels like action. You can point to it, you can put it in an email, you can tell the board you launched something, but did anything change about what the employees believe they are allowed to say? That's the real issue. Changing sounds more like this. A leader standing in front of the team saying, you can tell me this caseload is too much. You can tell me this is not sustainable. And you are not going to be punished for telling me the truth. That is permission. And permission has to come from somebody with enough authority to make it believable. You cannot wellness program your way out of culture where people are afraid to tell leadership that they are drowning. Self-care resources are a line item. Permission is behavior. One shows up in the budget, the other shows up whether people stay, whether people speak up, and eventually in your turnover numbers. So here's the true test. Has a leader in your organization said something like that to a real team member recently? Not buried in policy, not written in an email, not mentioned in orientation. Did somebody with authority look people in the eye and make it safe to tell the truth? If the answer is no, you may have a wellness program, but you may not have culture change. Third comparison, IT companies. Here's one of the questions I ask leadership teams in tech. Can a director interrupt a VP respectfully in the middle of a conversation and say, wait, I see risk here? If the answer is no, you have a problem. And your problem may not be technology, the process, or even the speed of the team. Your bottleneck may be that people do not feel free enough to disagree in real time. If your people cannot challenge a decision before it is made, you will pay for their silence after it fails. Because the organizations that move fast are not just the organizations with the best process documentation. They are organizations where disagreement can happen before the launch, before the decision gets too far down the road, before something breaks. That's what changing looks like. Stalling, on the other hand, looks like a beautiful slide about psychological safety in an onboarding presentation nobody will ever talk about again. So here's your test. Sit in your next leadership meeting and watch. Not what people say they believe. Watch what they do. When somebody sees a real risk, do they say it? Do they respectfully interrupt? Do they challenge the thinking? Or does everybody wait till the meeting is over and then have the real conversation in the hallway, on Teams, in a text, or in somebody else's office? You know that meeting after the meeting. Yeah, that one. Here's another leadership truth. The meeting after the meeting is usually evidence that the first meeting was not safe enough. If the real objection only comes out later, that tells you something. Your team may be talking about safety without actually practicing it. Now, let's discuss not-for-profit boards. A CEO told me her board loved her ideas when everybody was sitting in the room. Lots of nodding, lots of, that sounds great. Yes, we should absolutely do that. And then a quarter later, the idea was quietly defunded. So the problem was not the idea. The problem was that yes in the room didn't actually mean yes. And that's an important distinction. Here's what stalling looks like. A board nods, everybody feels good, everybody leaves the meeting thinking there was alignment, but nobody committed to anything real. Here's what changing looks like. A CEO stops accepting a verbal yes as a decision and starts asking, okay, what are we actually willing to fund? What are we committing to? Who owns it and by when? Now we're having a different conversation. Agreement without ownership, resources, or a deadline is not alignment. It's just a pleasant conversation. Because a nod is not a commitment. A calendar invite is not a decision. And everybody saying, I'm on board, does not automatically mean they are actually on board. Until somebody names the dollar amount, the owner, the deadline, or the actual next step, you may not have an agreement. You may just have a meeting that felt good for about an hour. Now, let me tie this all together with something I see all the time when I'm executive coaching. Most people think executive presence means being louder, taking up more airtime, walking into the room with a big personality. That is not executive presence. Executive presence is being clear enough, grounded enough, and certain enough that people know where you stand without having to overpower the room. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to dominate the conversation. Executive presence is not how much space you take up. It's how much weight your words carry when you speak. And quite frankly, a lot of executive presence coaching gets this backwards. It teaches people how to look confident, bigger gesture, stronger voice, better posture, take up more space. And some of that can be helpful, but that's a lot of surface work because the leaders who truly hold a room usually do not have to do all of that. They often say less, but what they say has weight and what they say lands. And they are not constantly apologizing for taking up space they have already earned. That applies whether you are a CEO or a woman walking into the C-suite for the first time. Real executive presence starts underneath the body language. It starts with, what do I believe I'm allowed to say? When do I believe I'm allowed to say it? And do I believe my voice belongs in this room? Because if we fix that layer, a lot of the posture takes care of itself. But if we skip that layer, you can teach somebody every confidence technique in the world and still end up with somebody performing confidence instead of actually operating in it. So here's the pattern underneath every one of these stories. Teams that are actually changing name the behavior, they say it out loud, they make it specific, then they practice it in the room. Teams that are stalling keep talking about the behavior in broad language, in a PowerPoint, a plan, a retreat, over and over again. Culture does not change because leadership agrees with the idea. Culture changes when leadership behaves differently in the room. A CEO who tells somebody directly you are already leading, a healthcare leader who tells the team you can tell me when this is too much, a director who can say, wait, there's risk here, a GM who asks, what are we actually committing to? And a leader who finally stops apologizing for the space she already earned. None of those things are complicated, but every one of them requires somebody to actually do something different, not just talk about doing something different. So if you have spent this year teaching your leadership team to talk about change, talk about culture, and talk about engagement and accountability, but you are not seeing the behavior change in the actual room, that's your answer. If leadership development never changes what happens inside the leadership room, it has not transformed the organization yet. That is how you know whether leadership development is working or whether everybody is just getting better at talking about leadership. Now, I've walked you through co-op executive, healthcare leaders, tech CEOs, chamber leaders, not-for-profit boards, and women stepping into the C-suite. Different industry, different roles, different challenges. Underneath, they all needed the same thing. Not more talking, behavior change. Specific, named, practice, and modeled from the top. If you're looking at your organization and thinking, we need to get to the real issue, I invite you to book a complimentary 20-minute leadership clarity call with me. The link is in the description and in my bio. Let's talk about what is actually happening inside your leadership team and what needs to change next. Changing or just talking? Because leadership is not what you say you're changing. Leadership is what people can actually see you doing differently. That really is the question. I'm Lena Morris. This is Authentic Encounters, Lena Speaks, and I'll see you next week.